I remember when I worked at Barnes and Noble, like I got called into my supervisor's office and he said to me, when you walk down the hall, people say you don't say hi to them. And, I was shocked. I was like, oh, okay.
Were you shocked because you're like, wait, are you supposed to do that?
Well, like, do I have to say hi to everyone? And when, who are the, it's just like, I just couldn't understand. Like, I'll say hi to people that I want to say hi to, it's like, we're in New York City. You can't say hi to everyone. But I think that expectation of neurotypical behavior hopefully is changing in companies so that, like, if somebody acts a little bit different, they are not judged as less than neurotypical. It's just different. So that's why I'm a big fan of this neurodiversity push.
ADHD Rewired, episode 377. This is the podcast for those of us with really good intentions and a slightly wandering attention. I'm Eric Tivers. I'm a licensed clinical social worker by training and a coach by design. I'm your host, and I have ADHD. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community. We are wired for connection, and you are not alone. Go to ADHDrewired.com to learn how you can join us in our free secret Facebook group. Get additional resources for every episode, including links to any resources we mention on today's show. You can support us on Patreon, sign up for our email newsletter, you can request podcast postcards to distribute to your clients and support groups, and you can learn all about our intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups. You can do all of this at our website, ADHDrewired.com. We know that starting is the hardest part, so let's get started.
Welcome back to another episode of ADHD Rewired. Today's guest is Dr. George Sachs. He is the co-founder and clinical director of Inflow, the first science-based app that has been built for people with ADHD by people with ADHD. Inflow is grounded in the principles of cognitive behavioral therapy, and its mission is to help every person with ADHD reach their full potential by providing sustainable, accessible, and cost-effective support. Alongside their core 7-week program, Inflow offers a safe community space and a range of support tools from ADHD-specific meditations to live events and personalized journaling. Dr. Sachs has committed most of his life to help others with ADHD. He was diagnosed later in life and is a licensed child psychologist and adult psychologist. He is the author of 4 books on ADHD and the founder of the Sachs Center in New York. Half the team of Inflow has ADHD, and Dr. Sachs is passionate about promoting neurodiversity in both the workplace and wider society. Dr. Sachs, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. That was excellent. And when you said most of my life, I was like, wow, I'm really getting old there. I mean, but it has been, I'm 52 now, and it has been since around my early 30s. So yeah, wow. Which is when I was diagnosed with ADHD. So I was in grad school. I was a late bloomer, like many people with ADHD. My 20s were experiments in many different things. And finally, none of them were working, so to speak. So
what kind of experiments are we talking about here?
Well, I traveled. I went, after college, I went to Emory University in Atlanta. I had an amazing time. And then all my buddies and friends were saying, oh, I'm going to go to New York and work in blah, 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 real estate, law firms or whatever. And I was like, oh my God, this is the time to see the world. The idea of jumping into a career after literally slogging through college with undiagnosed ADHD was not appealing. So I found an amazing program to teach English in Asia, which I recommend to everyone because Asian countries are always looking for English speakers, and you don't have to be an English major. You just have to be fluent in English. And so I went to South Korea on a program through Princeton University called Princeton in Asia, which is a 100-year-old program. And if you know anyone who's graduating college, that's an amazing experience. So I went to South Korea for a year and loved it. Huge fan of South Korea and the Koreans. And then I moved to Japan for 2 years and lived in a little village with a family and had also an amazing time. That ended in a successful way in the sense of it was time to come home. And then I experimented with television jobs and working in television. And
what kind of television jobs?
Fortunately, I was creative growing up, and my parents in the 70s and 80s, my parents were like what they call now free range parents. You know, they didn't get to it. Well, no, they were like they're older than baby boomers, whatever the generation after World War II and before baby boomers. But regardless, they just let me do what I was going to do naturally. And I think that's so important with if you parent kids with ADHD to find their passion. And in a weird way, my passion was children, working with children and being creative. So I decided I wanted to work in children's television. And because I felt like the boundaries of what you could come up with were endless. I mean, a giant yellow bird. I mean, like Big Bird. So I worked for one of the producers of Sesame Street who left the children's television workshop, and we created a number of projects. Unfortunately, none of them that went anywhere. But I then rode the .com boom of the late 90s, and which was an exciting time in New York City. When everybody thought they'd be a .com millionaire, including myself, but that didn't happen. And like I worked for BarnesandNoble.com at the end of the 90s. And everybody was like, well, if Amazon is a huge successful company, then of course Barnes and Noble will be even more. But that never happened. And there was huge layoffs, and the .com crash came. And then I just realized, like, I need some stability in my life. I majored in psychology at Emory, and I like helping people and I wanted a job that when I was 60 or 70, I could still say I was a psychologist with pride, as opposed to like working in these .com companies where I just couldn't imagine being 60.
Yeah.
And it was like that movie, that old movie from the back in the day, Logan's Run. I don't know if you remember. I think that was the name of it, but like after you turn 30, you died or something like that. You didn't exist. And that's how I felt in the .com era. Maybe it's changed. But so anyway, I went back to grad school, and it was the best thing for somebody with ADHD because it was very structured.
And you weren't diagnosed though yet, right?
No, I wasn't diagnosed, but it was, it's like do this and then do this. I saw it as like just one hoop of fire after the next. And I was pretty good about that, just doing the next thing and not getting caught up in, well, what am I, why? It wasn't really time to think about that. So,
I always think it's amazing when I hear, late diagnosed folks who do make it through higher ed undiagnosed. I mean, that was, me going to college was the thing that brought out my diagnosis, because I almost failed out my freshman year. And so I got diagnosed the very beginning of my sophomore year. So how do you think you were able to make it through higher ed and then grad school, not being diagnosed?
Well, we talk about motivation, and ADHD is a motivation deficit disorder. Really, it's a problem of motivation. And the truth was, it wasn't just Barnes and Noble. I had kicked around in other jobs, and there was enough fear in my life that like, what is my life going to be if this doesn't work? So I think that actually can be helpful, a healthy dose of fear. And that really motivated me to do pretty well, much better than my GPA in college. At that point I was 30, and I really wanted to be successful. And like I said, it was just like, do this and then, do this and do the next thing. And you can't really think long term. It was just like one paper or one test. And that was really helpful. But I think the biggest thing was my motivation was high. I was actually excited about the content, which I wasn't so much in college. another reason why I really stress to parents of teens and young adults with ADHD that they have to find their passion, because then the motivation increases and the symptoms decrease.
I know we don't suffer the boring very well.
No, and I think back to the free range parents, letting your kid explore will allow them to find their passions a lot faster. And maybe going to alternative like universities, like a lot of universities have this core curriculum. You have to take 2 years of the classes they tell you to take, but there are some that say just whatever you want to take, you can take, So anyway, I started working with kids because that was my interest. And of course, when you work with kids as a psychologist, ADHD is a primary problem. And so I was giving different measures to parents, and I was going through them and thinking, oh my God, this is me. This is exactly me. I was the spacey, inattentive type, and maybe sluggish cognitive tempo. That was the other diagnosis.
Explain what that, because we haven't talked too much about that on the show. Give us like the nutshell version of what is sluggish cognitive tempo.
Well, this was what Russell Barkley, I believe, came up with in the last 10 years to explain this type of.
I think he sort of popularized it. I think he found it.
No, he was not the.
Yeah.
Okay, well, he popularized it. I don't know if it actually caught on. I know he wanted to create something called concentration deficit disorder. And I don't think that ever caught on. That was not unique enough to, different enough from ADHD. But I think sluggish cognitive tempo, and it's really kind of the kid like me who is literally in left field playing my little league game, and just daydreaming and the balls flying over my head, and difficulty. It's just like the word sluggish. The reason it didn't catch on, because sluggish is a real negative word, but I think that actually describes me in some way, like just kind of, not unintelligent, but like a slow processor, a slow thinker, and slow talker, and so maybe low energy. I think that's that type of person. Maybe like the bumbling professor.
The one thing that I remember being at a session with Dr. Barkley where he was talking about sluggish cognitive tempo. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting is, says, unlike ADHD, that the symptoms of sluggish cognitive tempo are pretty reliably consistent, where in ADHD, we know we're pretty inconsistent. So I thought that was a really interesting sort of difference. But we kind of digress there.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would be curious if anything evolves with that sluggish cognitive tempo, because I think it does describe a little bit better than ADHD inattentive type.
Yeah.
But regardless, I was diagnosed, I self-diagnosed, and then felt pretty confident with it. I had done other tests. So anyway, then I graduated and moved to Los Angeles to do my internship, and worked in Compton and Watts, which is South Central Los Angeles.
It's a tough area, huh?
Well, those are very tough. Yeah, I mean, it was honestly traumatizing. I didn't even live there, and I was traumatized. And why was that? Because working in low income neighborhoods, I worked with foster kids who had been sexually abused or physically abused and removed from their parents, and then put with foster parents. And the foster parents are very wonderful people, but they have stressors, and bringing their child to a clinic once a week is really for transportation costs and all sorts of reasons. So we would go into the homes and do the psychotherapy there, and we learned something called TFCBT, which is an excellent form of treatment. It's called trauma-focused CBT. Highly recommended if you're a therapist and you want to really understand trauma in a simple way. But some of the stories that we would hear and some of the homes we would go into. There was just so much chaos, but it just really had an impact on me as a young therapist. That's the problem. They send the young psychologists and maybe young doctors too into these like very difficult situations without a lot of training or understanding of self-care. But I loved it in the sense that I love to travel the world. And this, for me, was a new world, like going into families' homes. South Central has a lot of African-American families and Mexican-American families and a lot of gang culture. But so after 2 years of training and supervising other therapists, I got an invitation to work to come back to New York City and worked for Dr. Hallowell in his clinic here for a bit and did some testing and therapy, and then set up my own private practice on the Upper West Side, where I have been since it's going on about 10 years now. So it's the Sachs Center, and I see children, teens, and adults focusing on ADHD and autism.
Awesome. So what I want to do is I want to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to dive in more to that because I think we also have a lot of parallels in our journey as well.
Great.
So we will be right back. Support for this podcast comes from the ADHD reWired coaching community, which includes our growing alumni membership community. We've had more than 600 people go through these coaching groups where members from past seasons get to know one another, continue their support, and continue to grow. The reWired coaching community also includes our intensive online coaching and accountability groups that run for 10 weeks, 4 times a year. Our 25th season of coaching and accountability groups begins on July 7th and goes through September 17th. We have 4 groups running at 4 different times, thanks to the addition of reWired coaches Moira Maben and Roxy Martin. If you are listening to this on the day it came out, that means our next registration event is on Thursday, May 27th at 1:30 p.m. Central. That's in 2 days, and the deadline to submit your application to join us for our second registration event is on Wednesday, May 26th at 12 p.m. Central. Don't miss out on your chance to join our 25th season of coaching and accountability groups.
I've done so much healing from this in these past 10 weeks, and I'm learning to be friends with my ADHD. I'm not done healing, but I have the tools and mindset to continue on this path of self-growth. If you are thinking about joining this group, I'd highly encourage it. There was something amazingly special about growing with a group of people who all had similar struggles as I did. It was encouraging, it was safe, it was inspiring, and above all, it was healing.
Head on over to coachingrewired.com and click on the big red button to get your name added to our summer interest list. And if you are overseas, when you go to coachingrewired.com, make sure you click on the blue button. We want to make sure that our coaching members overseas will still be able to check in at times that work for them so that each member can get the most out of our coaching season. If you've already added your name to our interest list, make sure to check your email for the instructions on what you need to submit to us so you can save your spot to join us for our upcoming registration event. The deadline to RSVP is tomorrow on Wednesday, May 26th at 12 p.m. Central. Sure, our journeys may have winding roads and squirrels galore, but that doesn't mean we have to navigate those roads alone. Take your next step on your ADHD journey and join the other ADHD brains just like you. Join us on Thursday, May 27th at 1:30 p.m. Central for our next registration event for our 25th season of coaching and accountability groups. And again, if you are listening to this on the day it came out, the deadline to RSVP is tomorrow. So if you want to register but you can't do it right now, what can you do right now? To remind yourself to go to coachingrewired.com. Whether it's writing it down, setting an alarm, or adding it to your calendar. We hope you'll join us this Thursday, March 27th. Especially if you are one of the many people that we know who have been thinking about joining for months and months and season after season, make this the one that you actually go to coachingrewired.com to register. That's coachingrewired.com.
Before this group, I was getting somewhat resigned to a confused, hard to figure out, hard to start life, where I was loved and gave love, but was still believing I was incomplete, not done. And now I'm inspired about working again in groups, particularly groups that have ADHD or have some challenges. And so I can spend more time in my purpose, which is being a contribution.
And it was just a huge aha moment for me to have that. And that became kind of almost my introduction to really start to understand how ADHD was affecting my life.
Come join us for season 25. Go to coachingrewired.com. 5,
4, 3, 2, 1, 0, ignition, liftoff.
It has happened. I want to thank everyone so much for all their patience and excitement as you have anxiously awaited to jump in, and the wait is over. Finally, the virtual doors to the Adult Study Hall membership community has opened. We opened the doors last Thursday, May 20th, to 126 people who all signed up. On our one day, we closed the doors at the end of the day, and it will be closed for the next month as we get things really figured out. We were going to have a new grand opening in June. Our new Adult Study Hall membership community includes Adult Study Hall Plus, or ASH Plus sessions, facilitated by our very own ADHD rewired coaching and accountability alumni members. These themed and guided sessions are for members who want some added structure when tackling their to-do list. Also included in the Adult Study Hall membership community is our Adult Study Hall On Demand, which I think I'm now going to start calling Adult Study Hall 24/7, because this is the room that you can jump into to work with others 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Start crossing things off your to-do list. You can even schedule your own Adult Study Hall On Demand or Adult Study Hall 24/7 sessions by letting other people know what you're going to be working on and when you are going to be there. Access and membership to the Adult Study Hall community is only $19.99 a month. This is absolutely the ADHD friendliest co-working space that you might not even know you needed. We are opening up the doors again for the entire community on June 21st. Go to adultstudyhall.com, add your name to the list there to make sure you get invited when we reopen the doors for our grand reopening of Adult Study Hall. Go to ADHDrewired.com, fill out the form, and get your name added to this brand new community. This is your place, your pace, your ADHD-friendly co-working space. I can't wait to meet all of you, and it's only going to get better from here. See you there. And we are back. All right. So before the break, you were saying that you started your own practice about 10 years ago, and working with kids primarily.
No, I see a number of, I see the whole spectrum. I mean, my youngest client, I think, was like 4, and my oldest was in late 60s.
All right. So, and being that the focus was ADHD and autism, when I started my clinical practice, that was exactly my focus as well. I have now shifted to only doing coaching for ADHD when, after my son was actually diagnosed with autism, I decided to take a step back from working with autism because it was, it became too
much.
Yeah, it was. But that's about me. I want to hear more about you. So you started your practice.
Well, I want to, I have, traits of autism as well in my family, and I think there's the benefit of that is the directness. So I think being honest has actually been very helpful and direct in my practice because, with parents who have children with autism, what I find is that they come to my clinic and it's clear to me that that child is on the spectrum, but they've never been diagnosed before but yet they've been to 2 to 3 doctors. And I think that this is a total suspicion, or is that a lot of doctors don't want to disappoint the parent or hurt the parent by giving them what they assume is such a horrible diagnosis. And in the cases of like high functioning, obviously, if the child is nonverbal, they would probably get that diagnosis sooner.
Right.
But with higher functioning, and so like being direct with them and saying, your child is on the spectrum. Well, you would know, right? That first time you hear those words are probably impactful, but very important.
I know when we got the official diagnosis for my son, I was really hoping that I was, just reading into stuff too much, because I had been working with autism prior to his diagnosis. And I just remember that moment when the doctor said to us after they did a couple-day evaluation, and he's like, there are some kids who were kind of on the fence, so we tell them to come back in like 6 months. And then she says, but your son isn't one of those kids. And I don't remember anything she said after that. And it's just like, I was the one when at 6 months old, I thought he had it, and our pediatrician was like, nah, he's fine. It's like, like 6-month-olds aren't supposed to be looking at books for half an hour with intense concentration. Right.
Yeah.
Like he was reading by 12 months old. He couldn't walk until he was 2, like that, very asynchronous development. Yeah. So he's highly gifted as well. So yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that the, had autistic traits, because when I had been talking in some ADHD spaces about the overlap with, ADHD and autism, and this was, maybe 10 years ago, and people were saying, what are you talking about? And then there was a study that came out maybe about 6 or 7 years ago, looking at the high number of autistic traits with people who are diagnosed with ADHD. So not necessarily saying they have autism, but hit a bunch of those markers, with autism. So it's always nice when sort of your sort of intuitions are actually validated by research.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I specialize in both, as you do, probably because there's so much overlap, but I have to say there, when somebody comes, when I'm in my office and I can hear the next client come, if they're on time, I'm like, okay, this client's probably on the spectrum. And if they're 10 minutes late, I have an idea like, oh, this is my ADHD client.
Well, it's funny. I always tell my clients who have had dual diagnoses with ADHD and autism, I always tell them, when they're struggling with a lot of those executive function, more planning related skills, I say, like, I'm always so excited for my clients who have both, because once they learn the planning skills, they're actually really consistent with using them, right? It's when you just have ADHD, it's like we learn them, we use them, and then we're bored of them and stop using them. And they're like, oh, okay, we have to reinvent the wheel 100 times. And, often people on the spectrum, like, they learn it, they do it, they're consistent with it.
I'm jealous of that because, like meditation, God, I've tried so many times but I don't like routine, which is a hallmark of autism. But right when I give a tool or something to a client on the spectrum, and they just like, oh yeah, I'm doing that every day now. It's just incorporated into their routine, and that's it for the rest of their lives.
Don't you love when as the clinician, you're like looking at your clients like, how do you do that? Can you teach me how to do that?
Yeah, I've learned a lot from my clients on the spectrum. I have that's why this whole concept of neurodiversity is so important, because a lot of my clients on the spectrum are excellent employees. They tend to not like to change every 2 years to enhance their salary. They just want to stay there and work for 10 years and have a good work environment and not cause any drama or start drama, and just tell me what to do and I'll do it. And every day I want to do this. And so this concept of neurodiversity, I think, is really important. And I've, in the last few years, noticed a lot of companies are now creating space for neurodiversity in their workforce and looking for clients, looking for people on the spectrum.
I did an interview about a year or two ago with someone from Microsoft who was spearheading a neurodiversity sort of movement in the company. So yeah, I think there's still, while there's a growing, I think, understanding and appreciation for it, there's still so much work to be done.
Oh yeah, there's tremendous work. And I think with this community in the interview process, because, it's fine, but the interviews are conducted as if you're neurotypical.
Yeah.
And I think that's still a challenge, especially on Zoom.
Right. You're basically being interviewed for your social skills when your job actually has to do with a technical skill.
Exactly.
Right.
And so there should be that's why I coach people to say, especially if you're on the spectrum, to say I'm neurodiverse in the very beginning of the interview.
Do you? Interesting. Okay.
And I use the word neurodiverse. It's a little bit more vague, but it's a clue to the interviewer that, you're not going to be your EQ or your social skills are not going to be the best, but this is why. And I also coach people to tell people that you have autism, because in the absence of that data, that information, people will make up stuff in their head. Like, well, why is she? I remember when I worked at Barnes & Noble, I got called into my supervisor's office and he said to me, when you walk down the hall, people say you don't say hi to them. And, I was shocked. I was like, oh, okay.
Were you shocked because you're like, wait, are you supposed to do that?
Well, do I have to say hi to everyone? And when, who are the, it's just so I just couldn't understand. I'll say hi to people that I want to say hi to, it's we're in New York City. You can't say hi to everyone. So, but I think that expectation of neurotypical behavior hopefully is changing in companies so that, if somebody acts a little bit different, they are not judged as less than neurotypical. It's just different. So that's why I'm a big fan of this neurodiversity push.
Let me ask you this. So do you, cause I have often, now I'm speaking about people with just ADHD, I encourage people to not self-disclose, on the interview. And are you speaking specifically more for people who are on the spectrum? They may have some more, different sort of features that kind of stand out more.
Sadly, I think exactly like you do in that it is sad, but I do tell clients with ADHD not to self-disclose. It's certainly in the interview because I think the stigma of ADHD is even greater than autism, because there's so many famous, successful people with autism, like Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates or Elon Musk, maybe,
and those are all speculative, but yeah.
Speculative, but
yeah.
I have my suspicions.
There's a great video on YouTube of Bill Gates. It's in a board meeting and they use time-lapse video and you just see him rocking back and forth. And it's just such an effective, to really kind of display that.
Well, they say Mark Zuckerberg, I think they always make fun of him for talking like a robot.
It wouldn't surprise me. I just think it's like just from a how we talk about these kinds of things, it's important that I think we sort of speak it's speculative,
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm not diagnosing anyone, but you're in good company if you have autism.
Yeah, I know. It's with I think any kind of self-disclosure and sort of self-advocacy, I think it always comes down to the elephant in the room. If there's something awkward in a social situation, the thing makes it more awkward is everyone notices it, but nobody's saying anything. As soon as we just say this is my pet elephant, okay, and then we carry it and move on. Right.
Right. Exactly. Cause we don't have to worry. What I was going to say is in the absence of telling somebody you're on the spectrum, they're going to make up stuff well, why doesn't she like me? Why is she cold to me? Did I do something wrong? We humans will make up all sorts of stuff. But if you just say I'm on the spectrum, all that will disappear.
Right. Because it's I might do something or say something. And if I do, it's let me know, or it's not intentional, or that's general self-advocacy stuff anyways. When we're trying to work on just being better or whatever it is that we do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So part of your work is you also are developing or have developed this app and a community. I would love for us to talk a little bit about that. Looking at the time, let's first actually take a quick break. And when we do, I want to hear all about Inflow and kind of what you are doing with that, because I think it's pretty exciting. So we will be right back. If you are new to ADHD Rewired, I want to welcome you to the podcast and to the ADHD Rewired Podcast Network. We have 4 other podcasts, all by and for people with ADHD. If you're looking for more conversations like this, but with a focus on parenting, families, and education, then check out ADHD Essentials with Brendan Mahan. If you're looking for some quick ear candy, but it's more like ear fruits and vegetables because it's good for you. If you're looking for something short with actionable steps, then check out Hacking Your ADHD with Will Curb. We're also proud to have the only podcast out there focusing on issues around diversity, with ADHD Diversified with MJ Siemens, who is an Asian Canadian with ADHD. Check out her recent episode as she shares an open letter she wrote to parents of ADHD and neurodiverse children. Are you a late diagnosed woman with ADHD? Moira Babin is. And in addition to being one of our group coaches, she's the host of our newest podcast, The ADHD Friendly Lifestyle. Moira focuses on women, moms, and the late diagnosed who want to try different and create their own ADHD friendly lifestyle. Check out all of the podcasts on the ADHD Rewired Podcast Network at ADHDrewired.com and click podcasts at the top of the page. All of these podcasts are available to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast player. This is the podcast network for people with ADHD by people with ADHD, and we want to thank you, our listeners, for tuning in each and every week. We really appreciate every single one of you. Head on over to ADHDrewired.com, click on podcasts and podcast network. You will see all of our podcasts there. And I just added a share button to the bottom of that page that you can share on all of your favorite social platforms. So instead of just sharing ADHD Rewired, you could share all 5 of our podcasts. And come join us every second Tuesday of the month for an hour of live Q&A. All the information about our podcast and the live Q&A are all at the website, which can be found at ADHDrewired.com. Support for ADHD Rewired comes from our Patreon community. If you want to become a part of our growing Patreon community and you want to get some extra perks and bonuses, head on over to ADHDrewired.com and click on the Patreon button. You will find all the perks and levels available, or you can customize your own pledge to contribute to the podcast. I would like to welcome Kim P. at the $25 a month level. Thank you so much for joining us on Patreon, and thank you for your contribution. I really do appreciate it and look forward to seeing you at our monthly coaching call, which you can be a part of when you become a patron at the $25 a month level. You can join me for our patron-only monthly coaching call every 4th Tuesday of the month at 2 p.m. Central. And hey, if you are listening to this on the day it came out, that means our next coaching call is today. That's at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. And if you want ad-free episodes, look no further. Members who contribute $5 a month can get every episode ad-free in a separate podcast feed. However, if you don't mind the ads and you like to know what's coming up here at ADHD Rewired, you can still contribute and support ADHD Rewired at any dollar amount. No matter your contribution, I am grateful for anything you are able to give. And of course, if you are not in a place that you can give financially right now, I am still grateful that you are here listening to this show. Thank you so much, and I really do appreciate you. But if you do want to join the Patreon community, get to know others with ADHD while supporting this show, please consider supporting us by becoming a patron. Go to ADHD ADHDrewired.com and click the Patreon button. That's ADHDrewired.com and click Patreon at the top of the page. And thanks. All right, we are back. We are talking with Dr. George Sachs. So you, what was about a year ago, started developing this app called Inflow.
I had been dreaming about creating something different, to communicate what my learnings about ADHD to a larger audience, but I just didn't have the courage or the executive functioning to do what my two founders have done. One of them, Levi, reached out to me on LinkedIn, and he was looking. They were two young guys one's from England and the other's from South Africa, living in London. They graduated from London School of Economics and decided to build a startup. And they wanted to focus on ADHD. So they reached out to a number of people, but thankfully I got their email on LinkedIn, which I rarely check. And we hit it off and founded this new company called Inflow. And the focus is to bring ADHD information, teaching, and practice, best practices to as many people as possible around the world. And we have launched after a year recently, and we are reaching people in Australia, in the UK, all over North America. So it's very exciting. And it's, I think, number one on the App Store now. In both iPhone and I don't know about Google, but it's either one or two, flip-flopping back and forth. And we haven't even really done a huge marketing campaign yet, which tells me the need is really strong.
So what does this app do?
So the app has a learning program that I created along with our advisors. One of them is Lydia Zalowska, who I think you've met, and Dr. Lauren Naus, who is a professor and researcher at the University of Richmond, focusing on ADHD. But we have taken Dr. Barkley's kind of areas of executive functioning or dysfunctioning, like time management, organization, impulsivity, emotion management, etc., and created learning programs, learning modules for each one of those. But and so there's text and audio that you can learn about all these things. They were created by myself and others. And so, but just listening to audio is not going to be enough. You need to practice it. And this is what Dr. Barkley always coaches or says is you need to take what you learn and bring it to the real world. And so that's the value of the app. You get the information and then you are encouraged through what we call challenges. And the challenges are related to what you learn. But for example, one would be like use a launching pad near your door to put your keys in your wallet. And that's a common thing ADHD coaches coach. And we talk about that, but we also have a challenge where you have to use your launching pad for 14 days and come back to the app and swipe that you've done it. And the idea is to start to build a habit. I mean, it would take, 60 days or half a year to build a habit, but we're kickstarting a habit. So that's the big, kind of based on the principles of CBT. You take the learned information and you practice it in the real world.
That's great. What are some of the other kind of challenges? I love that.
What else? We have so many. We have one that's my favorite that I'm practicing myself is actually from DBT. We have both CBT and DBT.
Dialectical behavior therapy.
Exactly. And it is what they call an emotion opposite. It sounds so simple, like, okay, well, this is my normal emotional response, which if you have ADHD is often dysregulated. And for me, it's with customer service reps on the phone. I embarrassed to say I get so impatient and it's a frustrating thing for me, I'm sure for them, but my emotion urge, as it's called, is to like get upset and not be so kind. And so one of the challenges is to develop an emotion opposite and use it in that situation. And it's actually worked for me. In my emotion, you can create your own, but you could take a walk but for me, it's a cognitive concept of imagining that person in India or the Philippines or the United States with their family at like a Thanksgiving or a barbecue. And all of a sudden, it's like, this is a real person. They have connections, they have family, they have children. Like, wow, why would I be angry at them? They're just doing a job to make some money to buy some dinner, So that's called the emotion opposite. And that's something that I've learned from the app myself.
So is that something where you would first like identify a triggering sort of scenario, and then sort of before you're in that triggering event, you've identified what that opposite would be? Exactly.
You have to identify it before. We have a journaling option in the app where you can journal it from different prompts. And I think in there's the journal where like, what is your trigger, your emotion urge, and what kind of emotion opposite do you want to create for yourself? And then you have to come back into the app and swipe that you've done it. And then you complete it. And then you get, we're building in a system of like, ranking and badges and different things like that.
Some gamification.
So there's a lot of, and you can pick your challenges. It's not like a prescribed path. There's choice. People with ADHD want choice. And then we have this amazing community where people are, healthy community and a safe community where people post. We have a daily question and they give feedback and support each other. Eventually, we're learning from companies like Peloton to have group challenges. So you can do your challenge in a group. Mm-hmm. Like we're going to start something like a decluttering month. Nice. Other coaches have done this.
We're doing that right now in our alumni community, the 30-day challenge, where it's like, first day of the month, you declutter 1 item, second day 2 items, third day 3 items. By the end of the month, it's like 400 and some items.
I know. I took that challenge. We're going to have things like that in the app, but I did that exact challenge. And when I got to like 10 days, it was struggling to find, but 30, that's how many? 400, you said?
I think 400 and I think like 68. So I decided to start my 30-day challenge on whatever Saturday was. I think the 24th. So my goal, and I did this in Zoom with a bunch of other people from my alumni community. And so my goal was I was just going to play catch up. So I was on the day, whatever the day was, would have been 300 items if I had been doing it all along. And I hit 48 items and I was really happy about that.
Yeah,
even though my goal
impressive.
is 300. Like, it's all about making progress. It's the progress piece is, so many people will think that, if I didn't do the exact thing I set out to do, I failed. It's like, wait a minute. Like if you're further along than where you were, like you were on track.
Well, I think that's a good point about coaching in general, and in Inflow, it's like striking a balance between compassion and acceptance, which is really important of ADHD, and compassion and self-compassion, but also encouragement and you can do this and, it's possible, and take 2 steps, 1 step back. But that's our kind of the voice of the app, is to be compassionate with yourself.
Yeah, I always tell people that compassion is the way forward. People are like, I just want to learn the skills. It's like, this is like the prerequisite skill. Like if I'm like, I'll tell people that like, if I thought that beating yourself up was going to be the best way for you to move forward with your life, I would come up with some really creative exercises on the most effective ways to beat yourself up. And usually when I present it that way, they're like, oh, yeah, I get it, because it doesn't help, and there's so much kind of trauma and shame associated with all the ways that we've screwed up in our lives, that self-compassion is so important. And in our accountability groups, we call it compassionate ass kicking. It's like we want to, start with compassion, understand that we know the struggle, right? And if you tell us you want to do something, we're going to keep asking you about it, right? It's not just, you can do the thing. Yeah, I know how that feels. Right. No, it's like, you do the thing. Okay. What's your next opportunity to do the thing?
Yeah, because what do they say? Fail forward. And inevitably, we're going to fail with whatever habit or challenge we start. So we have to, because what happens is if we don't have compassion, I call it a shame spiral.
Yeah.
We go into this shame spiral, which is can be debilitating and gets us off track. So a little bit of compassion will get us back on track faster.
So what are you most excited about with the feature of this app?
I think, let's see. I think the most exciting thing is reaching people who can't access like a CBT coach or your wonderful groups, who, by the way, I've heard a lot of, I've had clients in your groups, so I know how effective they are. But, everybody can't access those, or they're not in a city where they can just, like New York's like Upper West Side where there's, 10 therapists on every block, and so I think our mission is to reach those people who have ADHD or they suspect they might, but can't get the help besides, from a book. And to provide a community, there are other communities. Ours is also to create a safe community where people feel understood. I think that's another big thing is like, oh, I'm not alone with this. Okay, once somebody feels not alone with whatever they're struggling with, there's like an immediate boost in mood.
It is critical. That's why I don't even do one-on-one work anymore, because I have seen how like just the impact of group. It's like you can, from my perspective, you can match it hour to hour because my groups are intensive. That group work has such a profoundly bigger impact on ADHD because it's like, we hear and see other people going through this stuff and we're not judging them. We're like, we're having a lot of compassion for that person. But if we're saying the same thing that they're saying, like we're judging ourselves and thinking that, and then, it's like, wait a minute, it's like they're saying the same thing you're saying. You're not judging them. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a really effective way to learn. It's also easier sometimes to hear from a peer than like a coach.
Totally.
But yeah, I mean, we're excited about offering this to the world and getting feedback from our members about what's working and what's not. That was a lesson for me on software development when I first started working, like, that you put out something and then you see what works and then you iterate and tweak it, even though it's out there live in the world.
And I love that because it's like put out the shitty first draft, right? It's like just get it out there.
Yeah.
I know when I was gearing up to start my podcast like 7 years ago, one of the things that I learned from someone that helped me, because I definitely wrestled with some perfectionism in my life, that if you're not embarrassed with the first kind of stuff you put out there, you waited too long to start.
Amen. Yeah. I never really thought of this as like an antidote to perfection, but perfectionism is a big problem with ADHD and it has to be perfect or else people will reject us. But in the software world, they call it the MVP, the most viable product.
Yeah, minimally viable product. Like what's the shittiest thing you could put out there that someone will pay for?
So that was a little bit of for my perfectionism, a little bit of a hurdle, but yeah. So we've had a lot of fun, and the weirdest thing is I have never face to face met my co-founders. I mean,
That's
in
wild.
person.
Yeah,
and I feel very close to them, and we get along great. But we're across the ocean, and it's wonderful.
I'm guessing too that being that we're a year and some change into COVID, that you probably picked a pretty good time to launch this thing.
Absolutely, they realized this was the time, and so yeah, that's Inflow. I hope people check it out and give us feedback and really benefit from it.
And it's on every app store, right? On Apple,
yeah,
Google.
You just go to the App Store on the iPhone App Store, Apple App Store, and just search Inflow ADHD, and the same on the Google Store.
So let me ask you this. So as a sort of fellow person with ADHD, who's a mental health trained professional, who's also an entrepreneur, what's your biggest struggle?
Wow. I think just the biggest challenge for me with ADHD is consistency. And I think it has to do with, I would say at a foundation, emotional consistency. Because just like it's weird, but like some days I feel one way, like almost like a different person, because of my brain. And then I'm just thinking, but the key to success is, I think, consistency.
Is there something like specific around, as you said, the emotional piece, but like, is there, I know for me, one of the things that I'm really trying to improve on is consistency around communication with my team as my team is growing. It's something where it's like, I've come to accept that they don't know all the thoughts that are in my head. I need to actually communicate those things.
Oh yeah. Well, now that we have a team grounding that, that's another, that is a big one. I don't know if it's the biggest, but like spending time with people, getting them up to speed, not just assuming that like they can freestyle it like I would. So really, educating them on what I want and when, and by when, setting limits. But, in this last minute, I call this, I call time management relationship management. And that's really important. Like when I think about working with my two founders, I think of the relationship first, like maintaining the relationship, improving the relationship. So time management, if I'm late for a meeting, is going to impact that. So that's why I keep that out in front, maintaining a positive relationship. And that really impacts a lot of my choices and behaviors.
Well, Dr. George Sachs, thank you so much for spending this time with us. The app is Inflow. You can check out the website, getinflow.io. Any final thoughts you want to share with our listeners here?
If you just got diagnosed with ADHD, welcome to the club. Welcome to the community. It's a very safe, warm place.
Well, thanks for sharing what you're doing and for creating a big umbrella for this community. So thank you.
This is Eric Tivers. Thank you for listening, and congratulations for making it to the end. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community focused on learning, growing, and connection. The website is ADHD-rewired.com. You can find summaries and additional resources for each episode. You can apply to our free and secret Facebook community. You can learn more about ADHD Rewired's intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups, and sign up for my email newsletter to get exclusive content you won't get anywhere else. It's all at ADHDrewired.com. While you're there, click the Patreon button. If you're a regular listener and you're still listening to my voice, consider making a monthly contribution by becoming a patron through our Patreon page. If you are able to financially support my work, it would mean a lot. This show is free to listeners, but it is not free to produce. And patrons get really cool perks. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Tivers. You can like our Facebook page at facebook.com/ADHD-rewired. If you're a coach, therapist, or related professional, connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Eric Tivers. You can also subscribe to ADHD Rewired on YouTube. And you can subscribe to ADHD Rewired on YouTube and see select interviews and some other videos I've posted. Podcasts change lives. You can make a difference in someone's life by spreading the word about this podcast. Mention it in your online communities on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, or wherever you hang out online. And be sure to share it with your friends and your family and your clients, as well as your coaches, therapists, and doctors. And if you're a coach, therapist, doctor, or ADHD support group leader, and you would like a pack of podcast postcards to hand out, you can request those at my website, ADHDrewired.com. And if you're a member of CHAD or any other ADHD support group, please be sure to tell them about this podcast. You can even show them how to download it on their phone. You might be the person that turns somebody on to a podcast for the very first time. And if you really love this episode, please consider hitting share on your podcast player. I'm only one person, and I count on you to help me spread the message. One of the biggest things that you can do to support this podcast and to help other people discover it is to leave an honest rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or any other podcast app that accepts ratings and reviews. And don't forget to hit subscribe on this podcast on your podcast app so new episodes are automatically pushed to your favorite podcast app. Looking for more ways to listen and learn? Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/ADHD rewired. Not sure where to start? In no particular order. Check out Atomic Habits by James Clear, The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk, 10% Happier, and Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics. These are both by Dan Harris. Change Your Questions and Change Your Life by Marilee G. Adams. The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. Procrastinate on Purpose by Rory Vaden. The Four Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. Do you have trouble asking for help? Listen to The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. It's one of the best produced audiobooks I've ever heard. If you're looking for something a little bit more, say, magical, I unexpectedly fell in love with the Harry Potter series. And I don't usually listen to those kinds of books, and I loved it. And of course, if you haven't yet boarded the Brené Brown bus yet, check out Brené Brown's books, starting with The Gifts of Imperfection, Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, The Power of Vulnerability, and if you're an entrepreneur or leader in any capacity, check out her 2018 book, Dare to Lead. And Brené still is my most wanted guest, so if you know Brené, and you would be so kind to make that connection for me, I would be really, really grateful. You know who else I would like to have on the show? You. Click the podcast tab at ADHDrewired.com and then click the Be a Guest button at the top of that page and schedule a 15-minute pre-interview. This is Eric Tivers, reminding you to keep learning, keep growing, and keep connecting. Self-care is not selfish, and no matter what gets done or doesn't get done, at the end of the day, you are still enough. And no matter how hard it feels, we can do hard things. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next week.